So we'll continue with part 3 of Federalist number 8. The second paragraph, let me repeat the last part of it again. The history of war in that quarter of the globe is no longer a history of nations subdued and empires overturned, but of towns taken and retaken, of battles that decide nothing, of retreats more beneficial than victories, of much effort and little acquisition. So Hamilton here is comparing what's happened in Europe over the last few centuries, the continent of Europe, especially the western part of Europe, as what might happen in the United States. He says over the centuries in the continent of Europe, those countries have been at war with each other for so long that now they are kind of ready for the other country or part of that country to invade them. What they have done is they have fortified the borders. They have put forts all along the border, and if the enemy enters, they will know it before the enemy gets too far inland. In the old times, they could come all the way to the center of the country before you knew they were even there. So plunder and killing and mass killing would happen, but gradually they learned that if they fortify their borders with a small force, they can at least impede the progress of the invading army. They block it before too much damage is done. That's why he says now in that quarter of the globe, meaning that part of the Western Europe, it's no longer nations that are subdued or empires that are overturned, because they can stop the enemy before enemy moves too far inland or takes the capital and surprises them. So what happens is that they're just small victories, towns taken and retaken, and really battles that decide nothing. Enemy proceeds and then retreats, proceeds, retreats, small victories. Nothing big can be acquired. That's why he says little acquisition. They can gain very little by it. But see what happens in this country if we don't unite. And he says, just continue focusing on these 13 states, okay? True, one side is the ocean. But he says, pay attention to what happens in our country, in our 13 states here, if we don't unite. In this country, the scene would be altogether reversed. It's totally opposite of what happens in Europe now. The jealousy of military establishment would postpone them as long as possible. Because of their experience, because of the Americans' different states' experience with what Britain did, they're going to wait for a long time before they actually have a military establishment inside the country, before they even have a big army inside the country. The want of fortifications, leaving the frontier of one state open to another, would facilitate inroads. He says we don't have any forts like the Europeans do. All around this border, with the exception of a few British forts here, that still is controlled by Britain. He says we don't have any forts between our borders. So one state can have a small army and surprise the other state and invade it, whether it's north or south. He says we don't have any posts, we don't have any borders any fortresses to stop or impede an invading army. And it makes it real easy for a band of military people, a band of armed men, to cross borders from one to the other. The populous states would, with little difficulty, overrun their less populous neighbors. Imagine states like Virginia, the most populous state at the time, can easily invade and defeat North Carolina, or Pennsylvania can do the same, excuse me, to New Jersey. They can continue with Delaware, because these states are small and they don't have a big population. So that can be done easily. Conquests would be as easy to be made as difficult to be retained. If we are not united, conquests, plunder can easily happen. A populous state can easily take over a less populous state, a small state. War, therefore, would be desultory and predatory. War, in that case, would bring desolation, destruction, and it would be an act of, it's all predatory. It's when you take advantage of a vulnerable person or a group of people with no mercy. He's talking about that. It'll be an extremely ugly war. Plunder and devastation ever march in the train of irregulars, and when these band of men that are armed and invade the next stage, all they leave is plunder and destruction, because they have not been trained, they are not disciplined not to bother the civilians. They don't care. They loot, they burn, they take whatever they want to. The calamities of individuals would make the principal figure in the events which would characterize our military exploits. So these military exploits happen when a bigger state invades a smaller state. It's just ugly, and that would bring calamities, chaos, utter chaos, extreme chaos. And it'll ruin every society that it enters, that it invades, every community that it invades. Again, I've mentioned this before. When you look at this map, compare it with the Western European continent. On this map, it might look small, but compare this area with one or two countries of Western Europe. It's much bigger than those countries. So you've got all this long border, excuse me, that you'll be vulnerable. States share a long border with each other. Every state has a long border with the adjacent state. So how many forts are you going to put to defend yourself? So this is cost that is going to be unbelievably high if we don't unite. He's telling those people. And then he goes to the next paragraph. This picture is not too highly wrought, though I confess it would not long remain a just one. Safety from external danger is the most powerful director of national conduct. This part is very important because it's saying this scenario that I'm telling you might happen, might not happen. But the truth is that, the important thing is that, regardless of what society you look at, what country you look at, human beings, when they live in a community, in a society, to them, safety from external danger is the most powerful director of national conduct. They look at their safety from an invading army, from somebody from outside, as their highest priority. That's the most important thing to them. And because of that, even the ardent love of liberty will, after a time, give way to its dictates. In other words, regardless of how much liberty-loving, freedom-loving you are, because your safety matters the most, you will pretty much do anything to be safe. The violent destruction of life and property incident to war, the continual effort and alarm attendant on a state of continual danger, will compel nations the most attached to liberty to resort for repose and security to institutions which have a tendency to destroy their civil and political rights. To be more safe, they at length become willing to run the risk of being less free. It's very important. This is important, and I don't have enough time on this video, so I will continue in the next video and we'll just repeat this because it's such a beautiful paragraph.